Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here, and you are listening to episode 263 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. As promised, I have a more comprehensive recap of my recent African safari hunt with several podcast listeners for you today. I'll talk about that hunt in more detail and provide some reflections on how my equipment, and especially that new 7mm PRC rifle, performed for me. Now, like I also mentioned previously, I commissioned a video of this hunt for those who want to get an idea of what it was like out there. Isak from Diversio Productions in South Africa has done a lot of video work for our South Africa hunts in the past, and I think he did a fantastic job with this one of showing how the hunt went and giving people a good idea of what hunting in that part of South Africa is like. Click the link in the show notes to watch that video. Now, before we get started talking about this hunt, make sure you're on my email list. And to do that, click the link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com and sign up for my free ebook on the best hunting cartridges. You'll get that ebook when you sign up, plus you'll also start to receive the emails I send out every weekday. These are entertaining and informative emails about hunting, shooting, ballistics, etc. I get feedback all the time from people telling me how much they enjoy receiving them and how much they look forward to hearing from me every day. So make sure you are getting them too by going to huntingguns101.com. Next, make sure you also listen to episode 261 to hear our quote-unquote campfire discussion from the lodge right at the end of that safari. In that episode, you'll hear from both Mike and Fernando, and those guys were the listeners who joined me in Africa. You'll also hear from Johan and Christian, who were two of the PHs there with us, and everyone will talk about what they thought about that hunt. That episode is a little bit more raw and doesn't have the production values that a normal podcast episode has, but I still thought it was awesome. And episodes like that I think are really cool because you get to hear from people other than me, just regular podcast listeners just like you, to hear what they thought the hunt was like, some of the apprehensions they had going into it, how prepared they felt going into it, the ups and downs of the hunt, that sort of thing. So check that out if you haven't already listened to it. Okay, let's get started talking about this hunt in a little bit more detail. Now, like I mentioned previously, I decided about a year ago, actually the summer of 2022, that I wanted to organize a hunt with some podcast listeners. I planned two hunts initially, a sandhill crane hunt back in January of 2023 out in West Texas, and then this hunt in Africa. The crane hunt was awesome. You can hear all the details of that hunt in episodes 238 and 239. Now, we got a great group of guys together for that trip, and we all had a lot of fun. Things were similar with this hunt. Now, three guys initially signed up to join me. Fernando from Mexico, Mike from Canada, and Tim, who was also from the USA. I initially announced this hunt about a year ago, June of 2022, I think is when I announced it, and all three guys signed up to join me within the next couple of weeks. I was actually surprised how fast that hunt filled up and how much interest I got in it. Same thing with the crane hunt as well. Now, unfortunately, Tim started a new job in the previous year, and that new job necessitated a lot of intensive training before he started and required that he move across the country. He was still planning on joining us in Africa, but some last-minute delays and rescheduling with his move and training for the job prevented him from making it over. That was really disappointing for all of us, but especially for him. But things like that happen sometimes, and so we're going to do our best to get him over on another hunt in the future. But even so, Mike and Fernando came over, and we had a great time, just the three of us there together. Now, like Fernando mentioned in episode 261, our campfire episode, it is a little nerve-wracking planning a hunt where you're traveling across the world, literally, to hunt with some strangers that you met on the internet. While I'd never met Fernando and Mike before this trip, I at least knew Johan, Kobus, and the rest of the guys in Africa. Mike and Fernando didn't know any of us. They listened to my podcast, I talked with them on the phone, exchanged some emails with them, that sort of thing, but they'd never met me in person. And they'd never met each other either. Now, fortunately, they turned out to be great guys, and everyone got along really well. Both of them were experienced hunters in their home countries of Mexico and Canada, but they had never been to Africa before. And as far as I know, if I understand right, I don't think either one of them had actually ever hunted outside of their home country. They had traveled outside their home country, but they'd never hunted out of Canada or Mexico, respectively. Now, they had always wanted to go to Africa, but they hadn't made it over for various reasons. There are lots of people that fit into that boat. There are some people who have hunted Africa 10, 20, or even more times listening to this episode right now. There's also a good number of people that have been once, maybe twice, 3 times, something like that. And there are even more people listening who have never been to Africa before, or maybe they've been to Africa for work or a photo safari, but have never hunted. Well, Mike and Fernando fell into that last group of people, which is by far the biggest. Now, many people dream of hunting in Africa. After all, Africa has something of a mystical appeal to a lot of serious hunters as an exotic land of unique animals, different cultures, and fantastic hunting, where it is still possible to enjoy a true hunting adventure. However, many of the same things that make a hunt in Africa seem so appealing can also make the process of planning a hunt in an exotic location like that seem pretty intimidating as well. So with that in mind, I decided to host this hunt for a couple of listeners to help them achieve their hunting dreams. I wanted to get to know some of my listeners on a more personal level. I wanted to help them prepare for their hunt in a more hands-on manner and ensure they felt comfortable and ready to go for their hunt. And I also just wanted to share that experience with them. There's a quote that I really like by C.J. McElroy, who was the first head of Safari Club International. He said, "The only man I envy is the man who has not yet been to Africa, for he has so much to look forward to." I think that's a great quote, and it really kind of sums up how it feels. I remember how special my first trip to Africa was, and I was honored and privileged to share that with Mike and Fernando. Both, like I said, both were great guys. I genuinely enjoyed hunting with them during the day, and I really enjoyed just sitting around the dinner table or around the campfire each evening and talk about the previous day's hunting or previous hunts that they had done in their lives or just whatever. That's always a really fun part of the hunt, and I really enjoyed doing that with them as well as the PHs and whatnot that were in camp as well. Now, just being in Africa, that's always great. This hunt was wildly successful, though, and if you would have told me when I initially came up with the idea to do this hunt that this is how it was going to all end up, I would have been absolutely thrilled. It went better than I hoped it would have been in my wildest dreams. Excellent companionship in camp and afield. We saw some beautiful scenery, had some really amazing interactions with wildlife, both game and non-game species, and of course, we had some excellent hunting while we were there. Now, this was my 5th trip to Africa, and believe it or not, I had never taken a blue wildebeest. So for that reason, getting one was a priority for me on this hunt. I had taken a couple of impala before, but I figured I'd take one on this trip as well if I encountered a nice one. And the same thing with some other assorted plains game I had never taken in the past, like bushbuck, diker, etc. I also wanted another buffalo. Now, that said, my number one priority was to ensure that Mike and Fernando had a good time, and I subordinated my preferences to theirs. So Mike's number one priority was a Cape buffalo. He told me that animal was the whole reason he was going to Africa, and everything else was secondary. If he ended up getting a good buffalo with time remaining, then a good kudu was his next priority. And then he would just kind of take the rest of it as it came. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Mike was a pretty experienced sportsman, and he had done a lot of hunting inside Canada. He had considered bringing 1 or 2 of his own rifles, but decided he did not want to deal with the hassle. So for that reason, we set him up with our Ruger guide gun in .375 Ruger. That's one of the client rifles that we use in Africa. That rifle has a 20-inch barrel and is suppressed, so it handles well, it's a dream to shoot, and it absolutely hammers everything. So all in all, it's a really good all-around client rifle, and Mike used it for everything on his hunt, from impala all the way up to buffalo. Now, since he didn't bring a rifle, Mike's packing was simplified, and he actually didn't even bring a checked bag. He wore his hunting boots on the plane and was able to fit everything else he needed for the whole trip into a carry-on, which really impressed me. That was the first time I'd ever seen someone with my own eyes go to Africa with just a carry-on bag. But it makes sense, though. It's not a bad thing to do, especially if you're not bringing a gun. Africa is one of those hunting destinations where you only need a couple changes of clothes. They'll do the laundry and camp there for you, and you honestly just don't need that much stuff on most of these hunts. Even so, we're all guilty of overpacking to a certain degree. Some people more than others. But he, like I said, so he was able to do it with just a carry-on bag. So realize that is a possibility if you want to do that in the future if you're not bringing a rifle. Now, he flew on KLM from Calgary through Amsterdam, then on to Johannesburg, and he said that his trip over there was actually very straightforward. It was long, but not that big of a deal. Very few complications that he had to deal with or anything like that. Now, Fernando brought a Blosser R93 rifle with 300 Winchester Magnum and 375 H&H barrels. This rifle had a lot of sentimental value to him, and he really wanted to hunt with it, so he just sucked it up, did the necessary paperwork. Coming from Mexico, he did have a little bit of extra paperwork to do compared to, say, an American, but it still wasn't excessive. So he did need a pre-approved visa to visit South Africa. People from most countries don't need that. The United States, Canada, most Western European countries, they're what's called visa exempt going to South Africa. But Mexico is on that short list of non-visa exempt countries. It didn't turn out to be a big deal, though, and I gave him a little bit of help, and they approved him without trouble for his visa. He also needed an export permit from the Mexican government to bring his rifle, and so, once again, not a giant deal, but just a little bit more paperwork he had to do. He flew Turkish Airways from Mexico City via Istanbul to Johannesburg, and he said that even with the rifle, it was still a very not complicated and straightforward trip over there. So we were all fortunate that we had pretty easy and as not complicated as it gets anyway going to Africa trips getting there. Now, Fernando started off wanting a standard plains game hunt for kudu, wildebeest, etc. However, he eventually decided to hunt buffalo as well. Now, the biggest problem he had in preparing for his hunt, I think, was finding ammo. Things are getting better on that front in the USA as I record this. They're still not great, but they're better than they were 1 or 2 years ago. But there is still a really big shortage of ammo in Mexico, and there are actually very few legal sources of ammo in Mexico for hunters like him. And what you do find is all ridiculously expensive. It took a lot of looking over a long period of time, and he had to drop some serious cash on ammo, but he did end up finding some 200 grain terminal ascent ammo for his 300 Win Mag and some 300 grain trophy bonded bear claw and trophy bonded sledgehammer solid ammo from Federal for his 375. Now I live in East Texas, so I drove down to Houston, flew from Houston to Atlanta on Delta, and then Atlanta the rest of the way over. No big deal at all about my flights. That's basically the shortest and the simplest way that you can get to South Africa. I've done it a couple times that way, and I had no issues at all with it. I brought 2 rifles, a brand new Christensen Arms Ridgeline FFT in 7mm PRC, and a modified Ruger M77 Hawkeye in 4.58 Win Mag. Of note, both rifles are left-handed. Now, I bought that Ridgeline just a month or so before I departed, and it was a rush to get everything set up with it. Things went down to the wire, and I was stressing a little bit, but everything turned out great. I will do a more detailed report on this rifle later, but I will just say that it is light, like fully loaded, scope, sling, full magazine. It's barely more than 7 pounds. There's that rule of thumb that gets thrown around quite a lot, and I use it as well, that a good quote-unquote lightweight rifle should weigh in the 7 to 8 pound range. Like I said, fully loaded with everything ready to go, like exactly how you would hunt with it. Well, there's a good number of rifles that fit into that category, but for the most part, most of those are going to be closer to that 8 pound range than 7 pounds. More recently, those lighter rifles that are going to come in the 7 pound or lighter range have become more and more available, and to the general public like that is something you could just kind of buy off the shelf and go hunting with, as opposed to a custom or a semi-custom job. Well, that Christensen Arms Ridgeline FFT fits that bill, and they actually make an even lighter version of the FFT with a titanium action and whatnot that's even lighter than that. Now, this rifle was a little bit of an adjustment for me to get used to, just because it was so much lighter than everything else I normally hunt with. But once I got used to it, man, it really was not only nice to carry, but it shot great too. I did have a little bit of issues right at the beginning with accuracy with that rifle. I'm not sure if it was just me learning how to really shoot a light rifle like that and really become proficient with it, or if the barrel needed to be broken in. Christensen Arms does recommend a pretty intensive barrel break-in procedure, and I followed it, and it took a while, but after I was done with that, my goodness, that rifle will shoot. I could cover up my last few groups at the range, off sticks, with a quarter, maybe even a nickel if things were going great. So that thing was just shooting as close to lights out as you can get, and I was just floored with how well I could shoot with a lightweight rifle like that. Great trigger, just fit me really well. That rifle is not cheap, but wow, you get what you pay for with it. Now, I was able to obtain some 7mm PRC ammo in Hornady's outfitter line loaded with the 160 grain CX before I left. I did almost all of my barrel break-in with the Hornady Precision Hunter ammo with the 175 grain ELDX. That stuff shot great, but I was a little bit apprehensive about bringing those bullets to Africa, especially considering I wanted to hunt wildebeest and things like that. So I don't have personal experience hunting with that Hornady Precision Hunter ammo in 7mm PRC yet. Other people do. They say it's fine. For me, I preferred the tougher 160 grain CX, so that's what I ended up hunting with. After I was done with the barrel break-in, I tested out the CX ammo, and it worked great. It was not quite as accurate as the Precision Hunter ammo, but it was still easily sub-MOA, more than accurate enough for what I was going to be doing with it. And like I said, that's what I ended up taking to Africa. Now, I mounted a Leupold VX5 HD 3-15 by 44mm scope on that rifle. It's also worth noting that's a big-ish and kind of heavy scope. So even with that on it, that rifle was still barely over 7 pounds. If you knock that down to, say, a Leupold VX3 HD scope, it's going to be even lighter. Anyway, I had that scope on it. I have another VX5 on my 300 Win Mag, and I have used that scope with that rifle with a lot of success over the years. I think it's a great scope, and I love it. My only complaint about that original VX5 that I bought was it did not have the fire dot illuminated reticle. I was talking with a guy that I was hunting with one time, and he was like, what do you think of this scope? And I said, it's great. I wish it had a fire dot reticle in it, though. It's the only thing I would change about it. Leupold makes it with it, but I just didn't have it on this model. He's like, well, have you ever been in a situation where you wanted or needed it and didn't have it? And I was like, well, no, but maybe one day I will. Well, so when I was getting this rifle set up for this hunt, I made a point. I just bought a new VX5 with that reticle on it for this hunt. I'm glad I did. Now, let's switch gears, talk about that Ruger Hawkeye. That was a project rifle I inherited from my dad. He is left-handed like me. There's not a lot of really good left-handed dangerous game rifle options out there. There's not a lot of really good new production dangerous game rifle options, period, and there's even fewer of them in a left-handed configuration. So what he did was many years ago, I was probably 10 years ago now, maybe longer, he just bought a left-handed Ruger Hawkeye in 300 Winchester Magnum, then had it rebarreled to 4.58 Winchester Magnum. That is an option for those of you that want to convert something over to a solid dangerous game cartridge like that. And really 4.58 Win Mag is just about the only option. You can do, there's some other ones that you could do. 4.16 Taylor, I think, is one, 9.3 by 62, etc. But basically, in this case, the 4.58 is one of the few options out there that's widely available as a dangerous game cartridge and factory ammo and whatnot, that will fit in a standard length rifle action. And so in this case, the 4.58 Win Mag is actually a lower chamber, has a lower SAMI pressure than the 300 Win Mag, and it uses that same Magnum bolt face on it. So it really is just a matter of putting a new barrel on it, head spacing it appropriately. So that's what he did. And he got this rifle set up a long time ago, wanted to go back to Africa, and has not made it back in a long time due to a number of reasons and whatnot. But he had this rifle, and I was asking him about it. I was like, well, how does it shoot? And do you ever go hunting with it? Blah, blah, blah. And he was like, it just recoils too much. And in my mind, I was thinking to myself, the old man's getting soft. He's complaining about recoil and everything. Oh, well, that's too bad. That's probably a nice rifle he's got. So he let me shoot it one time. And I was like, oh my God, this thing does recoil a lot. You weren't joking. And, he ended up actually just giving it to me. He's like, maybe you can do something with this, whatever. So I was thinking about it. I was like, this rifle is just too light. I need to do something with it. This thing is going to be a project. Maybe I'm going to have to put a new stock on it, whatever, right? Put some mercury recoil reducers in it. Because even with the scope, it was still, gosh, I think 8.5 pounds, something like that. So well below that 10-pound recommended threshold for a rifle like that. But I thought, at the time, Silencer Central had just introduced their Banish 46 suppressor, which would fit on a 4.58 Win Mag. And it was the first widely available suppressor like that would fit on a big bore rifle like that. I was like, I'm going to try and get this rifle barrel threaded, and we'll see how it does with the suppressor on it. This is going to be a production anyway. I'm going to have to do some work on it. Let's see about getting it threaded and see how it does with the suppressor. So I did that, and early this year in 2023, I finally received that Banish 46. Took it out there, and my goodness, it made that rifle a whole lot easier to shoot. Now, it's also worth noting that this rifle is a pretty short barrel on it. It's like 20.5 inches, something like that. And I was concerned that with that short of a barrel, I wasn't going to be getting good muzzle velocity with it. The 4.58 Win Mag had problems with that way back in the day. It just wasn't reaching its desired performance threshold that the guys at Winchester wanted from it. And so I was worried that even though we were using better powders and whatnot today, that with that short barrel, a 24-inch barrel is much more common with it. With a 20-ish inch barrel, it wasn't going to be going fast enough. But I took it out there, chronographed it, and to my surprise, even out of a 20-inch barrel, I was getting basically factory advertised ballistics out of my Hornady ammo. Basically everything I shot in it, Federal, Barnes, Hornady, was all shooting about what they said it would. The Hornady was the stuff I wanted to use the most. They advertised, I want to say, like 2140 feet per second with a 500 grain bullet. I was getting 2150. So it's actually going a tiny bit faster than what they advertised. And I was pleasantly surprised with that. And putting that silencer on it dramatically reduced the recoil on it. It's still a thumper, but you reduce a heavy recoil like that by 20 or 30%, which is common with a suppressor. You get a massive drop off in recoil. Much more so than reducing, say, a 6.5 Creedmoor by 20 or 30%. And so there's a good amount of recoil, but it's much more manageable. And in this case, it was a little bit more recoil than the recoil on my 375 H&H, but it's also a whole lot more powerful. So I was very encouraged by that. Now, part of the problem that I dealt with all of this is because I was waiting for the suppressor for so long, I didn't want to take a lot of action on that rifle in case things weren't going to work out. So I get that suppressor, I think late winter, early spring this year, and so I only had a couple of months to get ready with it. And so between that and getting that Christensen Arms rifle up and running, last, say, 2 months before my hunt were pretty darn hectic. But it all kind of came together, right? Like I said, I was getting real deal 4.58 Win Mag performance with very manageable recoil, and my goodness, that rifle shot as well. I shot a 5-shot group out of that thing off a bench, and it was like 1.1 MOA. Doing great. So I spent a lot, basically for the last month before I went on that hunt, I was shooting once or twice a week with both rifles. Just boom, 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 boom. I burned up a bunch of ammo. And I put a Leupold VX5 HD 1:5 by 20 scope on that 4.58. So smaller, dangerous game scope on it. That one also had a illuminated reticle in it. So I went into that hunt feeling pretty darn confident with both of those rifles. I'm really happy with how things were going. Now, the question you're probably thinking to yourself is, okay, John, tell me how that Banish 46 worked in Africa. Well, unfortunately, I did not bring the Banish 46. I went back and forth on this a bunch of times before the hunt. The bottom line was that regardless of how many positive stories I heard, the letter I got from Brandon Maddox from the ATF about bringing it over, all that stuff, I did not feel 100% comfortable bringing that silencer on the hunt. I know, right? Lots of people do it without issues all the time. However, I was still very nervous myself, and I wanted to minimize my odds of running into issues. If it were just me going on this hunt, I might have been more tempted to do it. But since this was kind of an event with other people going over there with me and whatnot, I decided, it's going to be a little bit busy and kind of complex as it is. I'm not going to mess with this, and I'm just going to focus on these other aspects of the hunt and focus, on giving them a good time and all of that stuff over there. The thing that made that easier was I talked to my friend Johan, who was one of my PHs in Africa, and he was able to get a silencer for my 458 Win Mag for me for, get this, a whopping $180. So he got one set up with the standard thread pattern that would work on a 458 Win Mag, and bought it before the hunt for me. So it was there waiting for me, put it on my rifle, sighted it in when I got there, piece of cake. And interestingly, this suppressor was almost exactly the same size as the Banish 46. It was a little bit bigger. Now, the Banish 46 it's Silencer Central's largest suppressor. So, this one that I bought was a lot bigger than like a Banish 30, for instance. But it still wasn't that big change from the 46 that I was used to. And if I would have brought a silencer with me, it would have been just the 46, and I would have used it on both of my rifles. As things were, I used that South African silencer on both of my rifles, and I was just swapping them back and forth over there, and it worked fine. Like I said, zero was off for each rifle just a little bit, but you got to go to the range anyway to verify that, make sure things were good from the plane ride, and so I just adjusted it, and everything was fine. Now, I wasn't able to do a side-by-side comparison because I didn't bring the Banish 46, but that silencer in South Africa seemed to perform almost as well. It was maybe 90% of what the Banish 46 was giving me. It was maybe a little louder, maybe a little more recoil, maybe it was a little bit bigger and heavier, but not a giant difference either way. It ended up working great. It was not expensive at all, and I just left it over there at the end of the hunt so I can use it again on a hunt in the future if I so desire. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll bring my own suppressor on another hunt. We'll just have to see. Now, anyway, I also brought 2 different slings on this hunt. This is a follow-up to the issues with my sling from back on that hunt in Arizona I talked about in episode 232. I brought a Red Kettle M19 quick release sling and an Ultimate Firearm sling with me. Both were great. I was very happy with them. That Red Kettle sling spent most of the hunt on my 7 PRC, and the Ultimate Firearm sling spent most of the hunt on my 458. Both were a massive improvement over the one I had in Arizona, and I did not deal with any of the issues I had on this hunt, even carrying a suppressed rifle like I did in South Africa. And as you'll learn here shortly, I put some miles on my boots on that hunt in South Africa. Now, of note, my friend and professional hunter, Johan, loved that Ultimate Firearm sling so much that he asked me to send him 2 for him to use on his rifles, if that says anything for you there. All right, now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the hunt itself. Sorry, that was kind of a long wind-up, but I hope you found it interesting. We had 3 professional hunters in camp: Kobus, Johan, and Christian. We all mixed it up a little bit, and I think everybody hunted with all 3 PHs, but Fernando primarily hunted with Kobus, Mike with Christian, and I mostly hunted with Johan. Philemon is the lead tracker, and he floated around where he was needed the most, and once again, we all hunted with him. And then James and Ernest were the other 2 trackers. Now, I arrived the day before everyone else to help things get set up, and I went to the range, did a little bit of hunting myself, but nothing major happened for me that first day. Fernando arrived next, so we took him to the range the morning of May 18th, make sure he was dialed in. And since he wanted a buffalo, and because it is possible, as you will learn here shortly, to encounter a buffalo almost anywhere in that area where we were hunting, he started off his hunt with the 375 H&H barrel on his rifle. Now, after we shot at the range, we went out to hunt together. And Fernando and I made a deal. I'd be first up if we encountered a nice blue wildebeest, but he would get first crack at anything else. We quickly spotted and pursued a very nice buffalo shortly after daybreak that morning, but he gave us the slip. No problem, though. First morning, we're seeing lots of game out here. We're going to be off to a good start. Fernando and I kind of alternated unsuccessful stalks for the next couple of hours where we couldn't quite close the deal on blue wildebeest, zebra, eland, warthog, blessbok. Like I said, there was game everywhere out there, but we just were struggling just a little bit to get on it. And, part of that was Fernando being brand new there, still a little jet lag from his hunt, getting used to how things operate, all of that stuff, but, no problem. Even so, it was off to a slower start than we wanted. We did catch a break later that morning when Christian spotted a bedded blessbok. That blessbok was bedded down in a grassy depression there, and all you could see was his horns sticking up out of it. But Christian spotted him, and I think he saw an ear flicker or something like that. and looked at it. So, okay, this is a nice blessbok. We got out, made a good stalk on it, and I want to say it was maybe a 75-yard shot. The blessbok didn't know we were there, and then someone, I think, clapped or made some noise to get it to stand up. Fernando shot it. It ran like 10, 15 yards afterwards. Made a great shot. So he had that 375 barrel on his rifle. It's that 300 grain trophy bonded bear claw. Did a great work on that blessbok, but didn't cause excessive damage to it. And that was a good start to the hunt, right? Beautiful old blessbok. Very happy. Had lunch. We split up that evening. I pursued blue wildebeest unsuccessfully. Right, they were there, and this will be a story that you hear over and over again. They were there. I was seeing them. I just wasn't able to get on them. However, Fernando hit the jackpot with Kobus that evening and shot a gigantic sable. I'm not joking when he took one of the biggest sable I have ever seen. Once again, not a super long shot, maybe 50 yards and something like that. And he also shot it with a 375. Now, the challenge here, and this would be the case multiple times on our hunt, was finding a shooting window through the bush, right? You'd see the kind of the outline of the sable standing there and, trying to get a clear shot on the vitals, get set up on the sticks, and then the sable would move. And so they'd have to adjust it and all of that stuff. And but they finally managed to find a window and made a good shot on it. And that, once again, that was great. All in all, wonderful day, fantastic start to the hunt. And I was very happy for Fernando with how things were going for him. Now, Mike arrived in camp late that evening. I want to say he actually got there at like 2 a.m. or something, super late. Christian took him to the range the next morning to let him get familiar with that 375 Ruger that he was going to be using, and they started hunting that morning, which was 19 May. Now, while they were doing that, Fernando and I again went out together. And shortly after we left camp, we spotted a big herd of blue wildebeest, and it had a nice bull in it. So I tried to make a stalk on that bull in the herd with Philemon and Johan. So we spotted him from the truck in the road. We got out, started approaching him on foot. They were several hundred yards away. It was still a little bit too far to shoot. Kobus and Fernando kept driving in the truck like nothing happened. Just wanted to kind of get out of our way. And so they drove 500-600 yards out of sight, stopped, got out of the truck, and they were going to let things play out for us. And either I was going to shoot that wildebeest or they were going to spook and run off, and we'd link back up and go do something else. We were just about to get into position for a shot on that wildebeest when all of a sudden we heard three pretty rapid shots from behind us, which was the direction that Fernando and Kobus went. Then Kobus excitedly started calling Johan on the radio, telling us to come right now. So we sprinted in that direction. Now, we knew there was only one animal Kobus would have let Fernando shoot in that situation, where I was busy getting ready to stalk a wildebeest, and doing so would potentially mess up my hunt. Now, as the saying goes, life comes at you pretty fast sometimes, and that is exactly what happened with Fernando, Kobus, and a big Cape Buffalo bull that suddenly emerged from the brush and aggressively approached them that morning. Fernando ended up shooting that bull at 13 yards. Fortunately, he made good shots, though. His initial shot was with a 300 grain trophy bonded bear claw. The bull was quartering to him, so he punched it right just in front of that the point of the bull's shoulder, hit the heart, lungs. The bull kind of staggered, went down, got up, and then he shot it twice more as it ran away from him, back into the bush where he came from. And we found him in there 25, 30 yards away, stone dead. So just like that, we had our first buffalo down. Oh my goodness, it was a nice bull too. Sometimes you just have to take what the bush gives you, and Diana really smiled on Fernando that morning. Now, Fernando's luck continued later that morning when he got a chance encounter with a very nice Inyala. Now, at that point, he had switched over to his 300 Win Mag, and he shot it with a 200 grain terminal ascent. Now, that bullet also worked really well on this hunt, and it got very high marks from Kobus and everyone that was guiding him. He shot about half of his animals with the 300 Win Mag and about half with the 375, and all of those bullets worked really well for him. I was very impressed with that. Now, while Fernando and Kobus were taking care of things with that Inyala, Mike and I went off our own separate way with Christian and Johan, and we were going to see what we could find for Mike. We did find some blessbach when we put a stalk on them, but just couldn't quite close the deal. We got close a couple times, but they would always spook and run away before we could get into a good shooting position. But it did not take long for our luck to change when another big Inyala bull offered Mike a shot. We put a short stock on it, and he got a shot at, I want to say, 45, 50 yards. It presented a frontal shot, and it just crumpled when Mike shot it in the chest with his .375 Ruger. Now, the three of us split up after lunch. All right, all of that happened in the morning, by the way. I mean, Fernando shot his buffalo very early, like 7:15, something like that, maybe even 7 o'clock in the morning. And so we were able to recover that, and then a couple of hours later, we got the two Inyala, both pretty close to each other, 10, 11 in the morning, something like that. So we had lunch and then split up, went our own separate ways. I went out with Kobus and Philemon that afternoon, and we really laid down some boot leather out there walking. After a couple of hours, we got up on a good group of impala, pretty big group of impala, and the bush was so thick, and there was a bunch of them moving around in there, so we couldn't tell how many of them there were, but we were hoping there was going to be a nice ram in that herd or something like that. Unfortunately, as is often the case with things like that, a female spotted us, and she ended up spooking the rest of the herd. And as it turned out, there was a really nice blue wildebeest in there very close to him, and he spooked when the impala did, and we didn't know he was there until we saw him snorting and running off with him. So that was disappointing. But things came together for me a couple minutes later when we bumped into another group of impala. But in this case, the wind was good, and we happened to spot them first. So we stopped, and then they were walking towards us. And I got ready up on the sticks. We figured there was going to be a good ram in that group. Several females went across an opening in front of me, then a couple of younger males. Then Philemon spotted a big ram at the back. He said to get ready. I was on the sticks. That impala walked out in front of me, almost perfectly broadside. Philemon whistled at him to get him to stop, almost like he had scripted it. The impala stopped, looked at me broadside, and then I shot it. And I placed 160 grain CX straight through the vitals, right on the color change of the impala, which is where you want to do it, right on the shoulder. And he went, 10, 15 yards, something like that. He staggered, ran straight through a big brush in front of him, and we found him on the other side of it. So that was a good start to my hunt. Real happy with that. It played out almost perfectly, and it turned out pretty good on the video as well, as you'll see if you watch that. So all in all, pretty darn good day. And actually, while that was going on, Mike and Christian ended up taking a good blessbach. So busy day. But that's what happens when you get guys kind of going their own separate ways like that in a good hunting area. Now, we split up again the next morning. That was the 20th. Once again, I unsuccessfully pursued blue wildebeest, and that same problem continued through the day. It wasn't for lack of trying, right? Like I said, there were wildebeest there. We were seeing them. We were really working to get on a good bull, take a shot, but they just weren't coming together. Now, things were a little bit better for Mike and Fernando, though. Mike took a nice sable that morning, and Fernando took a really nice kudu that morning. Now, unfortunately for me, my luck did not improve that evening. And in fact, this evening and that next day were kind of the low point in my hunt. We encountered, like I said, I wanted a buffalo, and we encountered a bachelor group of 3 bulls that evening. One was okay, one was pretty good, and one was outstanding. Now, that area was pretty thick, but we actually spotted these bulls in a little bit more open area. And I wasn't exactly sure of the range at the time, but they were over 100 yards away, and we verified the range later. I'll tell you about it here in a minute. The problem was they knew we were there, and we couldn't get closer. Now, I felt really confident, though, and perhaps I was too confident. Like I said, that rifle was shooting lights out at home, and I was consistently able to shoot a 5-shot group at 100 yards off sticks that I could cover with my hand. Now, my range that I was shooting on went out to 125 yards, and I would shoot out that far occasionally, just to verify that I could, and it was always fine. It would hit just a tiny bit low, maybe 1 inch low. That's to be expected with a 4.58 Win Mag, but I was not having any issues, and I felt confident if I get a shot out there and I need to take it, I will, and I can do it. Anyway, the biggest bull was standing quartering to me with his left side facing me. Now, there was another bull behind and off to the side of him, and the third bull was further off to the left. Now, this was in the evening, and the sun was going down, but we still had plenty of light left. I think there was probably about an hour of light left at this point. Even so, those buffalo looked like they weren't going to hang around too much longer. And like I said, just with the setup, I was not confident that we would have been able to move closer without spooking those buffalo away. So that, combined with that normal anticipation and excitement normally present, when you're close in with buffalo like that, I was a little keyed up. I was on the sticks. I felt steady. So I placed the crosshairs about a third of the way up his body, just in front of the point of the shoulder, exhaled, squeezed the trigger. Now that bullet hit, we all heard it with a loud smack. He jumped, ran in a circle, and stopped pretty close to where he was when I initially shot him, but his other side was facing me now. I chambered another round while he was doing that. I prepared to fire again. The only problem was that other buffalo was standing directly behind him. They all kind of milled around there for a second right after I shot, and then they all kind of ended up pretty close to where they originally were. Unfortunately, like I said, that buffalo was directly behind the one I wanted to shoot. And so I held off just for a second because I didn't want to. I had a solid in the chamber now. I didn't want to shoot this buffalo, have the bullet go through it, and then hit that other buffalo as well. But both buffalo disappeared into the brush shortly afterwards, and they were standing kind of right on the edge of that open area, so they only had to move 5 yards to get into the brush, and then they kind of disappeared. But we felt pretty good about things at first. Johan was right next to me. Afterwards, when the buffalo disappeared, he looked at me, smiled, and gave me a thumbs up. And he and I started walking towards where we saw that buffalo with Philemon. And when we were doing that, one of the other bulls suddenly emerged from the bush and stood there angrily looking at us. And I think he was that third bull, the smaller one. But it could have been a fourth buffalo that had been in the brush the whole time we just didn't see. Now, I got ready to shoot just in case while Johan and Philemon yelled and they threw rocks at it. It took a few seconds, but that eventually did the trick, and he disappeared back into the bush. But that delayed us getting up there by, 30 seconds, a minute, something like that. Now, as we got closer to where that buffalo was when I shot him, we saw a dark figure move through the trees, and Philemon yelled, "That was the right bull, shoot it." But the problem was there was a bunch of tree branches kind of obscuring my view of it. I couldn't really see that well, and I didn't have a clear shot, so I kneeled down and was going to shoot under him. But as I did that, the buffalo started moving, and I fired, and I think I just shot behind it and missed at that point. And it disappeared into the blackness of the brush. And so we carefully chambered another round, reloaded, topped off my magazine, moved up to that spot, and we saw blood all over the ground where that buffalo was when I shot at him a second time. So it was clearly my buffalo, and he did look severely injured. Johan, Philemon, and I did our best to follow that buffalo and hopefully finish him off in the brush, but we didn't want to go too far because it was starting to get dark. So after we'd gone a little ways, we stopped in a more open area, and Philemon pointed at a thick clump of trees in front of us, and he said that the buffalo is probably in there right now. But like I said, it was starting to get dark. We didn't want to go in there after it and tangle with a wounded buffalo in the dark. So we marked that location where we stopped, and we headed back to camp that night. We were going to come back the next morning, find that buffalo stone dead. So it was kind of a subdued evening. I was really amped up, but then really nervous. Gosh, how is this buffalo going to be dead? Whatever. I didn't sleep great that night. I was not feeling good about that. So we headed back out the next morning, right? So Kobus went with us. So it was Johan, Kobus, Philemon, and me. We started following that trail. Now, Kobus was very confident. That buffalo, John, I'm sure it's going to be dead right in this bush up here where Philemon says it is. You hit him with a 4.58. The way he acted, I think you made a good shot on him. I'm sure he's there. We're going to find him. It's going to be great. We're going to have a great day. Sure enough, we followed that trail, and it went right where Philemon pointed to the previous evening. And we found where he stood there, where it looked like he stood there. Did not look like he laid down. It looked like he stood up all night long, maybe 200 yards from where the trail stopped that previous night, or rather where we stopped. In fact, he was probably standing right there where Philemon said he would be, waiting for us when we decided to call off our pursuit the previous evening. Like I said, though, he didn't lie down, and he wasn't dead. And unfortunately, it looked like he stopped bleeding, and he moved off at some point, probably when he heard us approach that morning. And we could see where his tracks were, where he was standing there, and we could see where the tracks left, and there was no blood with him. There was a tiny bit of blood as it started off, and then petered off within maybe 10 yards as he moved. So we continued to follow his tracks, and they led straight into a gigantic thorn patch. This had to be several hundred acres of really thick, thorny brush that varied between shoulder and head height. So just a real treat to go through, especially trailing a wounded buffalo. Of course, right, that's where the buffalo like to hang out. Right, there's food and water nearby, and perfect area for security because it was just such a mess getting in there. You're really noisy going through it. You can't go fast. It's just a pain in the rear. Doesn't bother them that much, but it's harder for people like people to go in there after them. Well, we went a couple hundred yards into the thorns following the buffalo's tracks. Then I saw a buffalo maybe 50, 75 yards away in front of us, maybe at our 2 o'clock position out there in front of us and to the right. We were on a slight rise in the ground, and that area is pretty flat, but there was a little bit of a rise there, and this buffalo was in a little bit of a depression. Maybe we were up like 3 feet, and it was down 3 feet, so I could see it pretty well. I could see maybe the top third or quarter of his body and then part of his head and his horns. Now, the problem was I could have taken that shot, but, and we would encounter this issue more than once over the next few days, we weren't 100% certain it was the right buffalo. We thought it was, but we also knew there were other buffalo in that area as well, and we didn't want to shoot the wrong buffalo by accident. And we actually ended up seeing several other bulls and cows that morning, all in that general area. So we had to make certain he was the right buffalo before shooting it, because the last thing we wanted was to shoot the wrong bull. Now, Philemon and Johan did end up confirming that was the right buffalo, but not fast enough for me to shoot him before he moved off. That happened at least one more time that day, where we encountered the right buffalo and I had a reasonable shot, but we weren't able to confirm with 100% certainty that it was the right bull till he moved. If he were painted orange or pink or had a giant shoot me sign above him, I could have killed him, no problem right there. But that's not the case in real life, though. We had to get a close look either at his chest to see a wound or for a good look at his face and his horns. It just took too long, and it just gave him that edge in identifying our presence first and giving him a chance to escape. We spent the rest of his day on his trail. We got close a couple times, but we could never quite close the deal. He knew he was being followed, and he was quick to take off running every time we would get close. I think we put in about 12 miles over the course of that day on his trail, and a lot of it was through that really nasty, thick, thorny stuff. He would zigzag through it. It was just a mess. Now, late in the afternoon, we decided to change our strategy since he didn't give any indication that he was slowing down. We knew he had not had water since before I shot him the previous evening, and he was heading in the direction of a small pond, and that was one of the few water sources in that area. So Kobus, Philemon, and I looped around and headed towards that water in an effort to beat him there. Mike and Fernando continued to hunt separately from me with Christian, and actually Fernando ended up shooting a nice zebra late that morning while I was on the trail of buffalo. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Mike told me he wanted a good buffalo on this hunt. That was his number one priority. So we split up again, and Mike went with Johan and Christian, and they went more or less in the opposite direction that I went to go to the pond. So we were trying to cast our net wide that evening. Hopefully I'd be able to get on my buffalo. Hopefully Mike would be able to find another nice buffalo. And who knows, maybe if something crazy happened, Mike would bump into my buffalo and shoot it and finish it off. But in any case, while we were separated, late that afternoon, Mike, Johan, and Christian spotted another good bachelor group of bulls. And we think it was a different bachelor group. And Mike got a good shot on a nice buffalo, maybe 50, 60 yards away, something like that. Not a very long shot. Mike's first shot was on the money. So was his second, and his third, and his fourth. Now, a buffalo is a large and tough creature at baseline. Some are tougher than others, though, and this particular bull just did not want to give up. When all was said and done, it took 11 shots from his .375 Ruger and from Johan's .416 Rigby to finally put that buffalo down. We examined the heart later, and we confirmed that at least 4, possibly 5, or even 6 shots hit the heart. And as you can imagine, things got a little exciting out there with that buffalo, especially considering what I was dealing with at the time, but everything turned out fine. That buffalo didn't go very far at all after Mike's initial shot either. So when he shot it, that buffalo was also standing quartering towards him. He hit it perfectly right in front of the shoulder, about third or halfway up. It hit the heart, the lungs, and the brachial plexus. And that bull spun around in a circle, holding one leg off the ground, and he eventually stopped at virtually the same spot, but with his other shoulder facing Mike. So he shot it again, almost in the same place on the other side, and had similar results. Then, out of an abundance of caution, and with Mike's permission, Johan fired a shot from his .416 into the hips of that buffalo to break it down. And he was successful. The buffalo collapsed, but it kept trying to get up. And so all of their subsequent shots were taken to keep that buffalo from regaining its feet and potentially hurting someone or escaping, and to minimize its suffering. Like I said, that buffalo was tough, and it did not want to give up. Sometimes that happens, though. And that's why you keep shooting and shooting and shooting until they're in the dirt and until it is over, because it's the dead ones that kill you, and they didn't want to have to trail a wounded buffalo in the evening time like that, and they darn sure didn't want someone to get hurt. So that is the rest of the story with what we were talking about with the Little Sarajevo comment from our podcast, our Campfire Podcast 261. Now, at this point, we'd taken a pretty healthy and diverse mix of animals. And even though I was frustrated and kind of feeling down with my mistake, I was very happy for Mike and Fernando. But it was interesting, though, that nobody had taken a blue wildebeest yet. That changed the next day, though, which was the 22nd. A weather front blew through, and while there were definitely wildebeest in the area the whole time, they seemed to be a whole lot more active during the day after this front came through, and our luck changed. So Fernando, as was often the case on this hunt, got off to a hot start, and he shot a nice blue wildebeest bull that morning. Now, we were unsuccessful finding my buffalo the previous evening, so I spent most of the day of the 22nd on his trail again. Once again, we got close, but never close enough to seal the deal. And at this point, he was just turning and running away from us the first time he got a clue that we were there. First time anyone made any noise, or he caught just a glimpse of something he didn't like or something like that, he'd take off running. We could see where he would be walking with his tracks, and then all of a sudden we'd see where the tracks started running. And that happened several times. Fortunately, my luck changed with wildebeest late that evening, and just by happenstance, we spotted a good wildebeest bull. Once again, light was fading, though, and I didn't have a lot of time to waste. I had to sprint a few hundred meters to get into a good shooting position, though, but I got set up on the sticks for a shot. And when all was said and done, that bull was maybe 70 to 80 meters away, but the light was fading, and he did not offer me an ideal shot presentation. I initially wanted to wait for him to turn and offer a good broadside shot, but he seemed content to eat with his rear end facing me. Unfortunately, light was fading fast, though, and I just did not have a lot of time to maneuver and get a better angle on him, or to wait for him to turn just in the natural course of things. So I was left with this decision. Either I got to pass on it, or I got to take another shot. So he kept looking back at us and was acting like he knew we were there, but wasn't real agitated. Maybe he didn't quite know what we were, or maybe he was feeling safe with it getting dark like that, but he kept looking back, and so his rear end was facing us, and he looked over his shoulder back at us. I had the illuminated reticle on my scope turned on, so I tucked that red dot centered up and down right behind his ear and his neck, squeezed the trigger, he dropped instantly. Now, I mentioned earlier I was glad I had that fire dot illuminated reticle in my scope for this hunt. Now, the VX5 is an excellent scope, and this is one of those situations where I could actually see better through the scope than I could with my naked eye in the fading light. At one point, I lifted my head up and looked over the scope at him, and I could see just a black blob out there. And then when I put my head back down and looked through the scope, I could very clearly see that wildebeest standing there. Now, the problem was that even as good as that scope was at the light at this point, I couldn't see black crosshairs on a black body like that with that wildebeest. But there wasn't an issue with this illuminated reticle. I just put that red dot where I wanted to hit, squeezed the trigger, and I hit exactly where I was aiming, and that was that. Looking back on things, that was the highlight of my hunt. I put in some serious walking to get that wildebeest over the course of the first half of the hunt up to that point, and I was thrilled to finally have it all come together that night. And it also felt good to redeem myself as well after botching things with the buffalo previously. As luck would have it, Mike also shot his wildebeest that same evening, right around the same time. And his experience also showed just how darn tough those creatures can be. Fernando shot his in the chest and it didn't go far. I shot mine in the neck and it dropped instantly. Mike shot his also in the chest with that 375 Ruger, and it ran a long distance afterwards, and they had a surprisingly difficult time finding it in the dark, but they did. Right? He made a good shot. A 375 is more than powerful enough for a wildebeest, but otherwise that could have been a frustrating night, and I'm glad that things went well for him. So that was really cool that all three of us got a wildebeest on the same day. Now the next day, this is the 23rd, more of the same for me. Lots of walking on the trail of that buffalo. Like I mentioned earlier, those buffalo in that area like to hang out in the places with the thickest, nastiest, and thorniest brush. We walked mile after mile through those areas, got just all torn up from the thorns, came close a couple times, but never got close enough to close that deal on that buffalo. And on the positive side of things, Mike ended up shooting a pretty darn nice warthog that afternoon, though. Now, interestingly, that warthog turned its head at the last second, and Mike unintentionally shot off one of the tusks with the same bullet that killed it. Talk about a 1 in a million shot. That was kind of cool to have it happen, but it was also a little disappointing for Mike that one of the tusks got ruined like that, but at least he got a good story out of it. Now, Fernando had an awesome day the next day on the 24th, and he ended up taking a nice Gemsbach and a great Impala. On the other hand, for me, another long, frustrating day, and actually it was kind of the same for Mike, too. I remained on the trail for buffalo, another solid day of walking and searching for that bull once again, came up short. Likewise, Mike was having similar problems with kudu. A great buffalo was his number one priority, but a nice kudu was priority number two. Similar to the issues I was having with buffalo, that kudu was just eluding him. It was just one step ahead. There was good kudu out there, and lots of them. I could have shot 3, 4, maybe 5 nice kudu bulls over the course of my hunt. But I wasn't looking for kudu, and Mike was, and he was struggling with it, but also that's how it goes. Now, we were feeling pretty down on ourselves at dinner. I could tell he was frustrated with how things were going with the kudu. I was feeling the same way about the buffalo. And we both had a really great hunt overall, but I didn't want to end things on a sour note like that. And, we had a good talk around the fire. And, this next upcoming day, which is the 25th, was going to be our last full day in Africa. But it was interesting how it works, though. After we talked for a couple minutes, I was trying to cheer him up, and he felt better, and I also felt a whole lot better afterwards too. So went to bed happy that night. Woke up early the next morning, and they just had a little bit different of a feel to it. Sure enough, Mike's luck changed almost right off the bat, and he got a great shot on a great-looking kudu early that morning. He shot well, put it down. And that was great news to hear about that. I was hunting separately from him. Everyone was doing their own thing. Hopefully he was going to get his kudu. Hopefully I was going to get my buffalo. And but I made a point. I went over there to see his kudu, congratulate him and everything. He was like a completely different guy at that point. And Mike looked like a giant weight had been lifted off his shoulders now that he got that kudu. And things ended really well for him. And he shot it also. It was funny, too. He shot it right in the middle of one of those giant thorn patches like that. And it was kind of a task to get it out of there and to clear enough space around it to take good trophy photos with it. But that's also just part of the adventure in hunting places like that sometimes. So I was really happy for him. That was great. And his luck continued that day and ended up shooting a nice Impala that afternoon. And Fernando also got a Steenbok that day. Now, as for me, I unfortunately went home without my buffalo. It was not for lack of trying. We worked our tails off trying to close the deal, and Johan, Kobus, Christian, they used every trick they could think of to get on him. On my shortest and lightest day of hunting, I walked 3.5 miles. On my longest day, I walked about 13 miles, and most days I was putting in a good 6 to 8 miles of walking, most of it through that really thick, thorny, nasty bush. Unfortunately, our best was not quite good enough, and I just came up short. I hated to end my hunt on a note like that, but I really just had no other option. We did everything we could, and it wasn't good enough. So what happened? It's hard to say for sure, but based upon the evidence that we had out there, pretty sure I pulled my shot left and low. And that bullet hit mainly brisket and the bottom of one lung on that buffalo. Remember, so he was quartering towards me, and pull it left and low like that, pull it towards the outside of his body, and like I said, brisket and that kind of that front of that offside lung. He bled well initially, but he eventually slowed down. That bleeding slowed down to a trickle, and it stopped. Based on his behavior and his tracks over the next few days, he was acting injured, but not mortally wounded. He hung out alone. Sometimes he hung out with some other bulls. Sometimes he even hung out with some cows and calves at various points, and he seemed to be eating and drinking normally, as well as defecating and urinating normally as well. I mean, there was a couple times that we found like literally like still wet droppings and urine on the ground from him on the trail. Just getting close, not quite close enough. If I had to bet money, I would say that buffalo is still alive and he will probably eventually recover, but we just don't know. And I hate that I injured him and I was not able to finish the job. I feel like I got to know him pretty well over the next 5 days, and it was interesting to see him continually return to the areas that he liked the best, namely that big river bottom with all the thorns. It's also a good display of Philemon, James, and Ernest's tracking ability that they were able to continually identify the tracks of that one buffalo in particular from all the other buffalo in that area. Now, Phil Massero came on my podcast a while ago. I think it was in 2021, shortly after he had a similar experience on a hunt in Zimbabwe. On that hunt, like me, he inflicted what we think was a survivable wound on a buffalo and then spent the rest of his hunt on the trail of that buffalo, never recovering it. This stuff happens from time to time, even to those that are more experienced hunters than I am. And there's no other way to describe it. It sucks. Phil felt terrible when he and I were talking about it. I felt bad when we had to leave the trail of that buffalo that first evening, and I felt terrible, like almost to the point of being physically ill after I realized that buffalo was still alive the next morning. Now, it wasn't my rifle. It was shooting great at home. I verified 0 upon arrival in Africa, still shooting great there, and I verified 0 again after I shot that buffalo just to make sure that it didn't get knocked off somehow. I fired 2 shots, and both bullets were nearly touching each other right next to the bullseye the next day. So the gun was clearly on. I was clearly capable of shooting it well. I just screwed up, and I felt like I have an obligation to be honest with you and own up to it when that's the case. I just got to go back and try and do better next time. Part of this will involve more practice. I practiced a lot, and I felt very confident going into this hunt, but more practice never hurts. Additionally, and I think this is the most important thing, I should not be too confident, and I need to be better about passing on shots when I'm not up to the task. In this case, I was skilled enough to be a little overconfident, but not quite good enough of a shot to match my confidence level. Looking back on things, that shot was just a little bit too long. It wasn't ridiculous. I think it was 120, 130 yards or so, but that was longer than is ideal, and I should have passed on it. It was early in the hunt, and it was late in the day. We should have either tried to get closer, and failing that, just waited for a better opportunity in the next couple of days. Now, I think Johan and Kobus just gave me more deference because I've hunted with them so much and that I normally shoot well and everything. And I think their thought was that if he says it's good and he feels confident, we're going to let him take that shot. And if things would have been a little bit different, we would have all been slapping backs that evening and talking about how much fun we were having and blah, 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 blah. But that's not how it worked. Like I said, I should have just waited for a better opportunity. There are lots of buffalo in that area, and I'm confident that if I would have been patient, in the next couple days I would have gotten a 40, 50, 60-yard shot, or something maybe even closer, like Mike or Fernando did. Both of them got much shorter shots than I did, and they both hit their buffalo almost perfectly, and in both cases it all ended well, and in neither case did their buffalo go very far. And I'm sure that's what would have happened to me if I would have gotten a 50-yard shot on my buffalo, if I would have been more patient and waited for a better opportunity. And like my next few days demonstrated, it is much easier in the long run to pass up a less than ideal shot in hopes of getting a better shot on any good buffalo in the future, instead of pushing a bad situation, wounding a buffalo, and then trying to track down and kill a single specific bull who is wounded, skittish, and knows he's being followed. Heck, I could have shot at least 2 more decent bull buffalo that we ran across while we were on the trail of the one that I wounded. And like I said, I wasn't even looking for those buffalo. So I feel very confident that I could have gotten on another nice buffalo, 1, 2, 3 days later. So take that lesson that I learned the hard way to heart. All things considered, and even considering how terrible I felt about that buffalo, this was a fantastic hunt, though. And I'm doing my best not to let that mar my memories of the experience. And I definitely did not want to bring Mike or Fernando down, and I don't think I did. All told, the three of us put 2 buffalo, 2 sable, 2 Inyala, 2 blessbok, 3 impala, 2 kudu, 3 blue wildebeest, steenbok, gemsbok, and a zebra in the skinning shed. So that was a really busy 9 days that we were there. That was all great, but there is more to the hunt than that, though. We spent over a week out in a beautiful part of Africa with a group of great guys. We saw some beautiful country, enjoyed some fantastic hunting, and had some incredible encounters with wildlife. I mean, some of the most memorable parts of this hunt were with other types of animals we didn't hunt. I had a cool encounter with a swarm of African honeybees one day. I saw a Cory bustard, that's the heaviest flying bird in the world, on another day. We saw multiple other creatures like mongoose, giraffe, monkey, untold numbers of other various bird species as well. We even saw some brown hyena, a spotted genet cat, and a serval cat at various points on the trip as well. The impala were also rutting while we were there, and the bush was full of the unusual sounds of rams grunting, snorting, and fighting each other for dominance. I had never heard anything like that before, and if I did not know better, I would have thought something else, like buffalo was making those noises instead of the little impala. Now, in that vein, there was an almost mind-blowing amount and variety of game animals in that area. And even on a slow day, we'd each see probably, 50 plus game animals of various types. Over the course of my hunt, I could have also taken kudu, eland, sable, inyala, gemsbok, zebra, warthog, blessbok, steenbok, and several more or different buffalo, impala, and blue wildebeest if I were so inclined. Most importantly, though, Mike and Fernando had a great time. It was wonderful seeing my good friends Kobus and Johan again, and I feel like I made 2 new hunting buddies with Mike and Fernando. It was an absolute pleasure to join Mike and Fernando on their first African hunting safari. I remember how special that experience was for me, and I felt privileged to share it with them. There were highs and lows on this hunt, but the highs felt that much sweeter after dealing with some adversity along the way, like with that blue wildebeest. That was an amazing feeling once that all came together, and I know Mike and Fernando had similar feelings on different animals at different parts of their hunt. You just got to keep plugging away, and things will eventually turn around. Fernando had difficulties at the very beginning of the hunt. Mike had some in the middle, and I had some towards the end. But we all had a fantastic hunt, and we went home happy. Now, all in all, too, I don't want to talk too much about this because we're running a little long today, but I feel like my gear held up very, very well over there. I was very happy with how that Christensen Arms Ridgeline worked, happy with the 7PRC cartridge, happy with that 160 grain CX. That rifle was a joy to carry, shot great, and it really worked great on both animals I shot on it, and I feel confident that even if I shot something really big, kudu, eland, whatever, it would have also really worked well. The scope was excellent too. Like I said, I'm really happy I had that fire dot reticle. And the 458 was good as well. And like I said, I think all the problems with it were with me. I think had I been up to the job, it would have been great. And we'd be talking about how wonderful that 458 is on buffalo, etc. The silencer was good. A little bigger than the Banish 46, but still not too big. All in all, happy with that. Also, too, Fernando with those 200 grain terminal ascent bullets. He is at least the second, maybe the third hunter we've had come over in the past year using those terminal ascent bullets, and they worked great. Everyone's been very, very happy with those. I think one-shot kills on darn near everything from impala up to and including kudu and waterbuck, things like that with it. So those are billed as a high BC accurate, tough bullet. And in my experience, seeing them over here, they seem to fit. They live up to expectations. The Trophy Bonded Bear Claw also worked well for Fernando, but not a big surprise. That's a good bullet, has a good reputation. It's old. Same thing with the Barnes bullets that Mike was using as well. And I talked a lot about how thorny the bush was there, and that is a concern for a lot of people going through that all the time. What the heck clothes should I wear? I brought some Tag Safari clothes with me, and I brought some 511 tactical clothes. They're not billed or advertised specifically as safari clothes, but I've worn them. I think this is the fourth hunt that I've worn them on in Africa, and man, they've worked great. Those 511 tactical clothes that I wear have been the best stuff I've ever worn over there. Just looking at them now, even after walking, I don't know how many miles I walked specifically through thorns. I don't know, maybe 10, 20 miles, something like that over the course of the trip. You can't even tell that I went through them. They just shrugged it off like nothing. They're not all torn or anything like that. So that was really good. And if you're looking for some clothes to wear on a hunt in a really thorny area like that, look real hard at 511 Tactical. Also happy with my slings too. The Red Kettle did fine. I had no complaints about it, but that Ultimate Firearm Sling really seemed to make an impression on everyone there. I really liked it, and then, like I said, that's what they're using there now too, because they wanted me to get them some. So that's a good sling. Links to a lot of this stuff is going to be in the show notes. And also, too, oh gosh, I completely forgot, were Axel X-Core earbuds. They were brand new, first released to the public just a couple weeks before I left. I got a pair in the mail just a few days before I left. They're like AirPods, but they give you hearing protection. So they give you all the good stuff about those Axel GS Extremes, but they're better. The sound quality's better, and there's no wires on them. They fit me better. Almost no distortion. It was so good that for the most part, I couldn't even tell that I was wearing them. It was just like having super ears the whole time. That was what I trusted to protect my hearing when I was on the trail of a wounded Cape buffalo. They performed great. Those are excellent earbuds. I still like the GS Extremes. I think the X-Cores are better though. So like I said, links to all this stuff is going to be in the show notes if you want to pick up some of this stuff for yourself. Okay, I'm itching to go back to Africa. I've hunted all over the world over the course of my life, and I've had some amazing experiences along the way, but I have still never found a place I love hunting as much as Africa, and I need another crack at that Cape buffalo. I need to redeem myself. I do not have firm plans to return to Africa at this instant, but I would love to go back in 2024, maybe 2025, on another podcast hunt with a couple of other listeners. Shoot me an email, john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com, or click the link in the show notes if you are interested in joining me on that hunt in the future. If you do that, let me know what you're interested in hunting. I'm not going to, you're not going to be committing to anything like that, but this will just be a way for me to gauge interest on if this is something that is worth doing again. I really enjoyed it. Mike seemed to enjoy it. Same with Fernando. I would love to do it again if we can get another good group of guys to go over there with me. So email me if I get a lot of solid interest from people who want to join me. That will make my decision to plan a hunt that much easier. I would love to have you come and hunt with me in Africa at some point, but you also don't have to wait for me to set up another trip with podcast listeners to go if you would rather go sooner rather than later, or if you'd rather go by yourself or with a friend or something like that. Like we said in that podcast episode with all of us talking from camp, don't wait. Don't put off a hunt in Africa if that's something that you've dreamed about doing. There's no guarantee that you'll have the time, the money, or the physical ability to pull off a hunt like that if you put things off for a year or two. I've seen it happen far too many times to count, and it's always sad when I see it happen to a guy. As I record this, we are now fully booked for 2023, but there are still some openings left for 2024. Now, if you go just outside of a podcast hunt, if I end up scheduling one for next year, I won't be there to hunt with you, but you'll be there hunting with Kobus, Christian, and or Johan in that same area where Fernando, Michael, and I all hunted. And even though I won't be there in person, just like I did with Mike and Fernando, I will be available to you to help answer your questions, sort out logistics, and just do everything possible to ensure your mind is at ease and you have a fun trip. You can hunt plains game, you can hunt buffalo, you can hunt both if you want. Now, like I said, email me, john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com if you want to join me on a hunt, or if you want to go over there by yourself, or visit bestsafarihunt.com to learn a little bit more about things. Make sure when you contact me, you say that you're a podcast listener, and I will give you a special bonus regardless of when you hunt. All right, that will do it for this episode. We're going to talk more about Africa, some other aspects of it here in some upcoming episodes. I'll talk about taxidermy, things like that, answer some of the other questions that I get a lot from people. So stand by for that. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Also, to click that other link in the show notes to check out the video of the hunt that Isak made. I think it turned out great, and it will also provide some more context of what things look like out there, and you can actually see us all hunting out there. So it'll be really cool. Check that out. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and I can help. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to the BigGameHuntingBlog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.